Well, thank you. It's nice to be in your midst today. Anyway, it's interesting. The emotions that come up. You know, we as human beings, there's something about anniversaries and special times that touch us dearly. And I didn't think I was going to be this way this morning. But thanks to Carolyn, she got me all worked up again, you know. So, but anyway, it's really nice to be here. As many of us know, if you look at some of the icons that come from religion, iconography, and statues and paintings and drawings and these beautiful expressions of art, religion is got a rich tradition and history with art. And one of the things you notice, especially from the East, but it's in all of religion, is when you look at these icons, and I know some of you who have altar practices, you may have little icons on there. And basically, there's what is called the language of the hands in theology, mythology, religion. And you'll notice that, especially Eastern traditions, there are all kinds of hand gestures that are made. And some of these icons are just gorgeous and graceful and very beautiful. And you'll see these delicate hands in different positions, you know, the Buddha, Kuan Yin. We see them in the Judeo-Christian with Mary, some of the hand gestures of Jesus that we see. And there's an entire language of this, and it's basically, if you know what you're looking at, a hand gesture can represent peace, or it can represent presence, healing, compassion, love, a sense of empowerment, a sense of moving on. And so basically the idea of this, and this cuts across all religious lines, is that if we think of our hands are literally and metaphorically the way that we touch the world around us, the way we touch one another. And in metaphysics, we talk about cause and effect. What is in the heart, what is in the consciousness comes out into the world. And so if you're someone who has an altar practice, and let's say you're about ready to go to work that day, or you're going to go spend some time with a loved one, and you look, maybe you have an icon on that altar, and if you look at the hand gesture and you understand a meaning to it, or it has a meaning to you, you can basically say, yeah, you know, I want to carry that forward into my day. I want to carry that forward into this relationship. At the Center for Spiritual Living in Reading, right off the sanctuary, there's a room, and it's a really nice little room. It's got some couches in it, and there's a little bit of a library in there, and it's a place where if you're a speaker, you can go in there and kind of spend some time alone before you speak, or if you're a practitioner or minister, you can spend time with someone who would like you to have you work with them or talk with them or pray with them. And whenever I'm up there, and I've spoken there a couple of times, I love to go into that room beforehand and to gather myself. And there is a beautiful picture in that room. It's a photograph. It's very large. It's preserved in a very artistic way, and I love this photo. It's a couple of hands, and they're very brown hands, and these are working hands. These are, you know, there ain't no manicure on these hands, you know, and a little bit of dirt under the fingernails, and there's some calluses, and these are hands that contain the patina of life. These are hands that have been of service maybe in the earth, or maybe in carpentry or pottery, or definitely been in service of life, serving a loved one, showing up for a loved one, changing diapers, or serving a meal, cleaning up a meal, housework, doing dishes, tending the fire, splitting the wood, have an old feel to them. And wound within these hands that are sort of loosely together is a string of prayer beads. But you know, it's interesting because the prayer beads of the mala or whatever it is doesn't really give it away. For example, these hands could belong to someone who live in the Himalayas or India. Could be a Catholic from Sicily. Could be a Native American with a fetish practice in this part of the world. We don't know. That's what I love about these hands. We don't know whose hands these are. We don't know. We really don't even know if it's a man or a woman. But we know that they are centered on the topic of today, which is spirituality, to be spiritual. And so what I imagine, because I like to weave stories in my mind when I see things, I imagine as I sit there, you know, this person, whoever they are, they're about ready to move. They're about ready to move forward in service. They're gonna tend a loved one. They're gonna show up to their family. They're gonna do what they're doing for a living, or maybe they're about ready to go to the fields, or build something, or throw a pot. And somehow, what I imagine is that, you know, they want to show up as best they can. And I imagine that maybe there's some sort of an issue with wherever they're going to show up to be of service, to be their highest self. And so they take a moment and they have those prayer beads. And those prayer beads are there to center them in what they believe, the highest self, spirituality, God. Joseph Campbell talks about the fact that we as human beings, we instinctively know, and I think the neuroscience is really proving this, we instinctively know that there is a power greater than we are, or we are part of, or is this big power that we would like to have a relationship with. But that unknown, that unseen, is so overwhelming to us that as we live our lives in this very heavy and dense and energetic world of the physical, our bodies, our cars, our houses, our carpets, our clothes, our aging, everything else that goes on, our visits to the doctor, that sometimes it's hard to grab a hold of that. And Joseph Campbell said that's what the great cathedral architecture is about. That's what the tchotchkes are about. That's what the prayer beads are about. That's what rising to a sunset or a sunrise is about, or being in nature, or by a river, or listening to a choir, or reading something that touches us, or sitting in front of a picture of some hands. Joseph Campbell said we need reminders. We look for reminders. That's the way we work as human beings. Think of what we've done with the visual arts, poetry, dance, music, the arts. We're always trying to find something that moves our mind in the direction of something that we intrinsically know, but it's so hard to grab a hold of. To move forward as basically the hands of God. Years ago, I hadn't thought about this till this morning when I came in, and when Carolyn did the meditation this morning, there's something about her voice that for me is timeless, and her presence, and takes me back. And she was one of my teachers. I had a lot of teachers. She was one of them, and I really appreciate this. When I took a class from her, I was really struggling with this idea of God is love, and I'm somebody who I don't want to grab a hold of the dualistic idea of God, that God is just a single person somewhere on some throne, on some cloud, somewhere that I've got to build a bridge to, or I've got to get his attention or her attention. It doesn't resonate with me. But I kind of get it in a way, because if we think about God as, God is love, well, I wanted to see the expression of love, a human expression of love. And I was in one of Carolyn's classes, and I brought this to her, and I said I was really struggling with it. I said, where's the expression of God's love, the physical expression? And she said, it's in you. It's in me. We are the hands of God. We are the voice of God. God coming through us. whatever that expression is. It's like, oh my God, there it is, yeah. Okay. There's a writer, a spiritual writer by the name of Mitch Horowitz. And he writes a lot about metaphysics and new thought, the metaphysical and new thought side of the religious tracts. And he tells a story in detail that I had heard little glimpses of this hanging around religious science, but I never really heard it like this before, and I'm kind of working on one of his books right now. And this story takes place on Sunday, September 21st, 1941. And it takes place in the Philharmonic Auditorium in Los Angeles, California, when the founder of religious science, Ernest Holmes, was on a stage with other metaphysical and New Thought teachers of the time. And they were there to kick off what they called 5 meetings. 5 meetings to talk about spirituality. And for Ernest Holmes, he was on the record as saying, I want to rally the faithful. I want to rally those who are faithful to these teachings. Now let's think for a moment. September 21st, 1941. 1941. What was going on then, Yeah, ethnic hatred, fascist ideology, nations going to war. And Ernest Holmes and these other people wanted to come together, and there were 3,500 people in attendance, according to Mr. Horowitz. And Ernest Holmes kicked off that gathering by talking about the fact that there is a power called God that is one. And he said, you can be a Catholic, you can be a Baptist, you can be a Methodist, you can be whatever you are. He said, I am not here today. This is my paraphrasing. He said, we are not here today to stand on the background, in the background of theology. We're here to stand in the foreground of a spiritual revelation. And in the second meeting, which was, I think, the next evening, there was a gentleman by the name of Frank Robinson. And Mitch Horowitz says there was something very interesting that happened at this meeting, besides the idea that they were standing on the precipice of the world going to war over these divisions and these fears and these breakdowns. And Horowitz said that a term that he didn't really know if Holmes or anyone else had brought out before in terms of looking at their followers, but it came out in this meeting, this series of meetings, 5 meetings. And it was the word beloved. And what do I mean by that? So Frank Robinson stood up in the second meeting and said, now, beloveds, we are all brothers and sisters, regardless of our religious affiliations, or our race or nationality, or what philosophy we follow. For we are simply beloveds. We are simply the beloveds. I love that, moving beyond, I'm a Methodist, I'm a Baptist, I'm a Catholic. I'm a beloved. You're a beloved. And I thought about this in the context of spirituality, because this was Ernest Holmes' way of saying, basically, our movement needs to go out and touch people. What's it like when someone calls us a beloved? It's really hard to fight with that. Like, you really want to fight with somebody, and then they, oh yeah, Andy, well, you're a beloved. Well, that just takes the air out of my balloon. That's really brilliant, man. All those people who were on the world stage in those years who were throwing manure at each other, losing sight of the fact that they're the beloveds. Spirituality, and I'm going to get into Holmes' definition of it a little bit later, but spirituality is about how do we touch? How do we touch? How do we connect? Imagining that we are the voice, the hands, the ears of spirit. When I was in my early 20s, back in those days, I was a pretty heavy cigarette smoker, and I went to a doctor. I've always tried to avoid doctors as much as I can. You know, they want me to lose weight. That's like a non-starter, man. It's like, I just want to walk in and say, like I meet a new doctor. Hey, doctor, how you doing? I know I got to lose weight. Okay, let's move on. Okay. So anyway, I was going to this doctor, Dr. Anderson. And he was a Canadian, and I always thought that was pretty. He had that thick kind of Canadian accent, like a hockey player, and I always thought that was kind of interesting. And I kind of wondered about him, but I've always been intimidated by doctors. They got all that education and stuff, and so I wasn't really super comfortable. But see, Dr. Anderson was a smoker, and the nurse in his office was always on him about it. Like if ever he had a pack of cigarettes in his pocket, she'd come in, she'd crush it, she'd take it away from him. What are you doing as a doctor? So I go and see him one day, and whatever I was there for, and so we're done, and I'm trying to get out of there. He said, "Hey," he said, "would you mind having a cigarette with me?" I said, "Okay, that's cool," So we walked out back, and he didn't have any cigarettes on him, so I thought that this was a golden moment, but he wanted a cigarette. Then I had to let him borrow my lighter too. So anyway, so we're having a cigarette. So it gave us about 5 or 6 minutes to talk, and so I was asking him about his journey from Canada to the United States, and also how he ended up in Northern California. He told me he first came to the United States. It was either in Wyoming or Montana, and was a real country doctor, man. I mean, he was like, delivering babies and setting limbs and traveling all over. And I don't know what town he was in wherever he was living, but he had to travel out to these ranches and way out to these places. And even though it was the 20th century and stuff, there were ranches that didn't have electricity and all kinds of stuff, He said, I'd deliver babies, and some rancher would give me a half a beef to pay me off and things. It was really interesting. So anyway, he goes out, and there's a woman. They let him know that there's a woman who'd been his patient. She was an older woman, and she was passing away, and she was in the process of passing away. So, and this family was a big old nuclear family, a couple of generations living together, a couple of big ranch houses way out. Had to drive an hour out there. It's in the middle of winter. Goes out there in his station wagon, and he goes in to see her and attend to her. And while he was there, this blizzard just came in and just dumped all this snow just within an hour. And he wasn't going to be going anywhere, right? So now he's staying with this family. He goes in and he says whatever he has said. And he's got some medication to kind of ease her through it and take away whatever discomfort she had. And he was telling me, he said, he said, being a doctor, he said, sometimes people don't really know how to talk to you or be around you. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, I noticed that, yeah. I'm a menthol guy myself, but, So anyway, so he said, so he was stuck. He ended up being there for like 3 or 4 days. This blizzard really came in. So he said he just, was helping set the table. He washed the dishes. He helped him tend the fire. And then he would go in and see Grandma. And there were a bunch of little kids there, 3 or 4 kids, extended family. This was their grandmother. They loved her dearly. Grew up with her. She's like one of those special kind of parents. Family matriarch. And she's in her room and she's under her quilt. And he would go in there. And he said, there was nothing I could do for her except, be with her during this time. So he'd go in and he would hold her hand. And he said, I don't know if you know this, but he said, among mammals, if you touch the forehead, every mammal, and we're mammals, by the way, we respond to that. It is the place where our mothers probably kissed us after we were born. It's the place where you check for the temperature. It's the place that Maybe when we went to bed at night and our parents came in to tuck us in, they touched. Love you, you know. He told me, he said, if you're ever in the presence of people having a really hard time, and he said, and if you have their permission, he said, if you can touch their forehead, especially if you turn your hand around and put it like this. And he was with her and he would just touch her forehead. And he realized that the door was open and there were about 3 or 4 grandchildren watching him. He said he became incredibly close to that family in that moment. And when she passed away, you know, a couple days later, and they had a cemetery on the land on this ranch, and she was going to be there, and they built her coffin, and they asked him if he would come out, and he did. And the children gathered around him as they stood out on the corner of that ranch and paid their last respects to this woman that they loved so dearly. He had become one of them in that touch. He had become one of them in the washing of the dishes and the tending of the fire, allowing Spirit to move through him. In the gesture of the hand. And we think about the hand as metaphor because we move out into the world, and you know, I think that every single one of us in our lives, you know, maybe we're a caregiver, or maybe we work around people who are challenged, or, you know, just out here, and you know, you guys have all kind of alluded to, you know, this whole community's been affected by what happened up on the hill, and running across people all the time. And how can I allow my voice, my words, my presence, my touch to be the love of God, to be the compassion of God, to bring forward what it is that we hold so dear? Ernest Holmes, I've been digging around this week, and if you go into the Science of Mind textbook, he talks about the word spiritual and spirituality in a number of places, and I kind of threw some of those together. So he says, Ernest Holmes said, to be spiritual or to express spirituality means a realization. So in other words, to embody a realization, not just talk about it, but embody a realization that all life is unified. You know, that's what Reverend Kathy in that beautiful prayer, all life is unified. We are all part. And that's what Ernest Holmes was trying to say back in 1941. Hey, we're all unified, man. There ain't something better we can do here, you know? And the highest God and the innermost God is one God. And that goes back to my original question to Carolyn. How can this big, huge, cosmic God express love to me? And she said, through you, the innermost God. You know, we all like it in metaphysics. Wow, you know, I got some God in me. You know what I'm saying? I'm in God, and God. We love that stuff. But is there a responsibility to that? Yeah. Yeah, I hate to sound like a Baptist, you know what I'm saying? But there's some responsibility here with that, you know, to not just be our bad self, but to show up. If we want God to be loved, then we have to be love. The highest God and the innermost God is one God. This God is personal to all who feel this indwelling presence. What if someone in our life ain't feeling it right now? Have you ever gone to a loved one and said, I need some love, man, because I ain't feeling it right now. I need some God right now because I'm not feeling it. Can you give me some God? Can you give me some touch? Can you give me some voice? And this truth is revealed to individuals through one's intuitive and spiritual nature. I love this idea of intuitive. To get a feeling for someone, a sense of someone. I work in drug and alcohol residential treatment. And so much of that work, and anyone who works with people, you got to have an intuition. Got to be able to size it up. If you want to be a spiritual being, be present. Be present. We can't be present when we're doing drive-bys. And we wonder why we get all fractured and everything. I mean, imagine if you're really going through something and you seek somebody out to talk to them, and they're talking to you for a minute, and then all of a sudden they kind of slip down and pull out the screen. How do you feel about that? I'm disconnected, man. I'm out. Thanks, have a nice day, So to use our intuition and to be open, there's all this talk about people being psychic and everything. How about just knowing what's in front of you? You know what I'm saying? I mean, yeah, it's cool that you can bring up Uncle Earl who died 20 years ago, but how about me? I'm right here right now. You're here right now. Let's be present to each other. Let's read it, right? And anyone may become a revealer of truth who lives in close contact with this indwelling God. So God is ever present. We can't ever be away from it. It's with us. We're with it. That's it. That's the program. But to be aware of it. So as Ernest Holmes, who was a dyed-in-the-wool metaphysician, there is only one, and we are all part of it. We are not separate from God. God is not separate from us. It doesn't matter. But then he says here, lives in close contact. That becomes a consciousness. That becomes a frame of mind. That becomes, again, the responsibility. You know what? I'm an expression of spirit in this world. I had a grandfather. I had two sets of grandparents. One I was really close to and one I wasn't. And in terms of the grandparents I wasn't, I had a grandfather who, he was pretty quiet and he could be kind of aloof. And I found something intimidating about him. I don't know, as a little kid. And kind of was always doing his own thing. But he was a barber. And I was really young when he left this world, but I remember because every single time we visited him, he lived down in Modesto. We go down like once a year, the holidays or something. I mean, I could have got a haircut the week before, but when I was there, I got a haircut because that was just his thing, man. You're going to get a haircut, right? So I don't know why my parents didn't ever figure that out, like, Andy needs a haircut. Well, we're going down in about a week, so, but anyway. So the thing I remember about him, and this is kind of some of that cellular memory, is when he was actually cutting my hair, and even if he's using those big old cranky clippers they would use and stuff, there was something very gentle and very sweet about the way he cut my hair. I remember that touch. At least I thought I did. I remembered that touch. And the reason I say I thought I did is what's the rest of the story. It lived in me. It lived in me somewhere. And I felt like when he cut my hair, he was totally present for me. I was totally present for him. Even if we never even spoke a word, there was just the way he did everything. Okay, so this is the what if, and this is the rest of the story. My son, my oldest son, who never met his great-grandfather, because I was a little kid when he passed away, he became a barber. And so he's always lived a long way away from me. But for a while he was living in Oakland. And it was right after the fire happened last year. And I never had him cut my hair. And so I went down to see him in Oakland and I made arrangements to have him cut my hair. And so I met him at his barber shop at the end of the day because after that we were going to go have dinner together and stuff. I sat down in the chair and he says, "What do you want me to do?" I said, make something out of this. I just give you a free canvas here, cowlicks and everything. And so anyway, he started to cut my hair. And the minute I'm looking in the mirror and it came back, that feeling. He had my grandfather's touch. Anyway, he looks up at me, and I don't have a poker face at all. I'm the worst poker player in the world. Whatever I'm feeling is right there. And he looked at me in the mirror. He goes, "What's wrong?" He said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." I said, "Well, I felt a ghost." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Man, you have got my grandfather's touch." And the beautiful thing about this is this was after the fire, right, not too long after the fire. And man, I really needed that. It wasn't like some, like some great esoteric words of wisdom or some Jesus Buddha thing. It wasn't meditation. It wasn't incense. It wasn't anything. It was just simply, I'm here with you. I love you. You're important to me. I'm present for you. And that little kid who now was the age I am and had gone through a fire needed someone who loved him just to show up in that way. Ernest Holmes says, the spirituality and the idea of being spiritual is to live in an atmosphere of a realization of good with a capital G. A profound and powerful realization of God and nothing more. And I love this, borrowing light from nothing else. Turning to God, turning to Spirit. Borrowing light from nothing else. Because God is the coming forth of the fountain that never fails, whose source is in eternity. And he says, putting us back on track of the realization of a self-reliance on Spirit as the ultimate reality. Something that has gotten me through this last year is that regardless of what is gone or burned up or whatever, there is an ultimate reality. And I may not know it at any given moment, but there is an ultimate reality. And the beautiful thing is that I've had a whole bunch of people in my life show up with that just at the times I've needed them in this last year. And my desire is to show up for them as well. Thank you today. Namaste.